Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a bridge to a better life discussion. I am your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me are Dr. Anahy Fonseca and Jussara Korngold. If this is the first time that you are watching this podcast like program, please note that our program, which is Psychology and Spirituality, has a weekly talks, and they're based on the works by Joanna de Angelis, offering a safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spirituality concepts from a psychological lens, and as such, bringing insights, actionable tips, and advice to help you and me lead a better life. Today, we will address our inner child. And let's just remind we spoke previously about parental complexes. So now it's time to shift the conversation to the child complex. And before we start our conversation, I just wanted to recognize the organizations that are sponsoring this program. They are AMI Brazil, the TV Mansão do Caminho, the International Spiritist Council, and the United States Spiritist Federation. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you'd like to check us out and know more information about what we're doing, please go to spiritist.us. Spiritist.us. And if you have any questions, please write them down. Would love to hear from you. Any comments, any feedback, any questions, and we'll address at a later episode. But Anahy, Jussara, it's good to see you. I would like to make a recommendation. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I would like to share a story. Actually, it's based on a script of a 2000 Disney movie that starred Bruce Willis, and The Kid is the name of the movie. It's a very interesting because it can help us visualize what we're going to be talking today. So the story goes, Russ Duritz, that's Bruce Willis, is a very wealthy LA image consultant. And and this is very important, right? As he nears his 40th birthday, midlife crisis, let's think, right? Halfway through his life, we encounter this man who's good looking, very wealthy, but oh boy, very cynical and beyond that very harsh type of personality. He is also estranged from his father, and oh, by the way, remembers nothing about his childhood. And one day, so the story goes, he's sleeping and he wakes up to find an intruder in his home, and that intruder is a 8-year-old boy that turns out to be this chubby version of himself, Rusty. Rusty and Russ start in this film a journey to understand who they are and how to uncover all the things that were part of their childhood and how to move on. I think there's enough there for us to get started. Anaísa, Sara, can we talk maybe about the concept of the inner child and reference this movie? If you haven't seen it, I recommend it for you to see it at a later time. Shall we?
Yes. Hello, everyone. So it's a great movie, and Bruce Willis is great in the role of this adult man that is very narcissistic in a certain way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And finds himself so important. Of course, if he's kind of a narcissist, so empathy would be, very low, and he's hiding. Actually, it's a of course it's a kind of a irony, because he is an image consultant, as Marcia said, and he hides behind a persona, so the
Very good
social
point.
mask, yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
we have talked already about. And he hides his pain and his childhood traumas, right? The inner child trauma. So we all have an inner child because we all have been children, right? So we say that the memories and the feelings, emotions, and of course traumas, of course, that we have that are part of this complex of the inner child, they are kept in our unconscious mind, because the ego of the child is very fragile. So the ego protects itself against having to deal with something that the child doesn't understand, but feels. The child feels everything. The child is very much connected, as I think we talked about that when we talked about parental complexes. It's pretty much, connected. It's very connected with the unconscious of mother and father and the caretakers. So what happened is that many times, because we are not perfect and father and mother have their own problems and conflicts, the child will feel the dramas, let's say, that are in the unconscious of the parents. And of course, something that happens also, the dynamic of the family, things that are difficult for everybody included, the adults that take care of the child. So the child will feel everything, will have an inner experience of suffering or of pain, but will not be able to deal with that in a sense.
So what you mean to articulate the trauma that they're going through?
Yeah, to give sense to, because
Hmm.
the child doesn't have, as we talked previously, the thinking is very concrete.
Sure.
So if a mother is crying, for instance, the child will feel guilty because will think she or he has done something to cause the mother's crying, for instance, and sadness. If, for instance, especially if the child, and they are always like, oh, I don't want to do that, I don't like you because you're sending me to bed early, or you're saying that I cannot look to the TV program that I want to look. So the thinking is very concrete in the child. And so if mother or father are upset, so she must be or he must be responsible.
Hmm.
And of course doesn't have the abstract thinking that we are going to develop in adolescent years, and of course as adults. The abstract thinking, the reasoning, oh, but maybe something happened, um, that, my aunt called my mom and then she was upset later on. So maybe they must have argued or something like that. So this is very abstract thinking, okay, because it's complex thinking, cause and
Hmm.
consequence and things like that, and what can influence our emotions, for instance. The child doesn't know anything about that, so it's very concrete, the thinking. So what happens is that we are going to have some kind of hurt in childhood, and
Yeah.
it can turn to a big trauma, for instance, right? So we don't want to give people spoilers, but we
It,
have to give
we
some
will. We will.
real spoilers, right?
We
So
will.
this cute small boy, he's 8 years old, right?
Uh-huh.
And the main character, Russ, is turning 40, something like that.
Hmm.
And it was in that age that we're going to learn later on that he had a big trauma. Maybe we're going to tell people the trauma in
Yeah.
the end of our podcast, but that makes sense.
No, no, I think what we should do, because it's very relevant to what you said. And
Oh,
if
okay.
if I may, just if you want to watch the movie and you don't want, just please watch the movie and come back to the podcast. But
Great.
basically, and I love what you said, the magical thinking, right? Not the concrete thinking. For the boy, was that he was called in the principal's office and had to go home, and he associated that with the death of his mother, right? So I think it's very interesting how all of it is associated. Did you see anything else, Anahy, before we move forward from that trauma?
Yeah, remember that the father, when
Yeah,
they get home,
yeah,
the father doesn't hit him, but really does something like that, shakes him,
yes,
right?
yeah,
And says, "Grow up, you have to grow up."
yeah,
So that was erased from the conscious mind, right? Because it's very, very threatening, emotionally threatening for the stability and for the ego of the child. The small child doesn't have means or ways of dealing with such emotions and understanding what later on, when he realizes that he has to help his inner child, right? But
mm-hmm.
the kid that is there, and understand what happened, because he had forgotten everything about his childhood, as you said
Mm-hmm.
previously. So what happens is that the father says, "Grow up. You have to grow up." And as an adult, he understood that the father was really scared to raise him
Yes,
alone. But
yes,
as a child, that's the concrete thinking. If the father says, "Grow up, you have to grow up, don't cry," and the father says, "Don't
yes,
cry,"
yes,
so he's not allowed to suffer from to have fear of losing his mother, and so he cannot suffer. The meaning for the child, "Don't cry," is you're not allowed, and you shouldn't suffer, because you are going to make father suffer. You are going to be responsible, as you said, for suffering, or for even the death of your mother.
mm-hmm.
So what happens, what we call a narcissistic defense, when you shut down and you shut yourself inside yourself, right? We could say it like that. And he grew up to be a man who wouldn't feel anything. And we can see in the movie a lack of empathy for his secretary. That was wonderful. I love the
Mm-hmm.
character, by the way, of the secretary. And of course, he was feeling something for um, the lady who is the main, like his romantic pair. But
Yeah,
he wouldn't acknowledge that, because he was protecting himself. He couldn't feel anything. Feeling would be threatening for his balance. But he's okay. He's in his middle age. He's 40, right? 40 years old. He's turning 40. So what happens is that his inner child was screaming inside of himself, let's say, and materializes, we could say that, and just turns up in his living room or whatever. So if you realize, in the beginning he was really mad, "Go away, go away," and we feel like, how can he say something to such a cute little boy, right? So
uh-huh.
very cold. So this is all a narcissistic defense. And we know that when a person is acting like that, is because the person is suffering a lot. But what I would especially, yes,
Yeah,
go ahead, Sam.
I make a question. Why do we call it narcissistic? I think many of us may be in doubt about this terminology because we always think in terms of narcissism, in terms of, admiring ourselves. And in this case, definitely we see a shutdown from trauma. But why do we call narcissistic?
Well, we use the myth of Narcissus, the Greek myth, um, and of course, because he was lost, he was not only like in love with himself.
Mm-hmm.
This is part of the story, but he was kind of lost in his own image.
Mm.
But the image reflected outside of Narcissus, not this looking to the inside of ourselves. So that's why I think that's an easy way to understand. We call a narcissistic defense because the child doesn't have sophisticated defense mechanisms. So the child will only try to protect himself, herself, by shutting down, let's say, and just um, looking in a sense like Narcissus, the Greek myth, just looking outside of
Could
itself,
could
not.
could we could we say looking at the outside as form versus content, and form as an example of ego, as an ego structure, conscious structure that he created for his persona, versus what all the deeply buried feeling and emotions that would betray his trauma as a child,
That's
right?
great. That's a great an explanation because it's simple. That's great, Marcia. Yeah,
Mm,
and also for us to remember, we have already talked about the shadow, right? The
mhm,
opposite of the persona, and we have said that in the shadow, many times there are very nice aspects of the personality, but the ego is not able to deal with them. So, for instance, in his shadow was, for instance, empathy and love
mhm.
and
Yes.
feeling, because all of this threatened him. Father had told him, "Don't cry, grow up. So don't feel, don't
Yes.
connect to your pain," right?
Mhm.
So I think maybe now it's a little clear that, and also, Jussara, I think it's interesting that you asked about narcissism, because if we are disconnected from the richness of our
Yeah.
that we are in our
Mhm.
unconscious, in our inner home, let's say, then we lose authenticity, right? We are just trying to copy. And the irony is that he was a image consultant.
Yeah.
He would say, use your hair like this and like that, and talk like this and that. But, and I think this is very interesting because we are socially, let's say, and globally, pretty much in this kind of narcissistic posture, right? That we have to look of what other people wear and dress or act, and try to imitate. And this
Mhm.
is very narcissistic, and we lose our authenticity, that it's a richness of human species, of
Mhm.
us like human beings, what
Mhm.
characterizes us. But I would love to listen to Jussara and also you, Marcia, about one aspect also, that we have seen that in the core of our complexes are what Jung called the archetypes, ancient forms, types that are ancient, right? And in the core of our complex, our own experience of the inner child, is the archetype of the child. And the archetype of the child, a child, and it doesn't matter the age, the civilization, and it doesn't matter the culture. We know that children, they bring life, they bring energy, creativity, future, rebirth, right? Always when we are upset, if we have lost someone,
Mhm.
or if we have had some kind of not exactly, we can be depressed, but some kind of thing that happened in our lives, that we felt like losing something very important. If we go to a park and see children playing, for instance, right, we feel already, oh, there is hope. So, since we are also talking about Joanna de Angelis and about spiritist knowledge and reincarnation and rebirth, right? What do you guys think about that? About the archetype of the inner child, and why it's so important for us to connect the archetype of the child, and why it's so important for us to connect with the inner child? I'd love to hear you guys.
Just had any thoughts? Oh, yeah. Well, what I wanted to talk was actually a different aspect of it, if you don't mind, because while you're talking, what came to my mind was, and of course we're now moving away from the movie, but really the sense of what is that moving, that growing beyond your inner child. And what came to my mind, Anahy, was actually in our society how difficult it is when we are seeing so much of the helicopter parents, right? Doing the opposite that we saw in the movies. In the movies, it would be perhaps 40 years, well, 30 years before 2000, maybe in the right 60s, 70s, where a different society, a different culture, nevertheless, not the culture that we see today from parenting of our children. And what I thought about it is, are we losing something in this, either becoming eternally trapped in being a child, meaning not growing up to be the adult that we need to be, or the opposite, which happened to this movie, which is a father figure pushing that young person to grow up without really allowing the time to mature. So those are the things that came to my mind. But you had asked about the idea of rebirth and reincarnation, which, as we know, is central to Spiritism. It's core of Spiritism. And in the movie, there's a little bit of that where he needed to go through a rebirth, right, Jussara and Anahy, a going back to what he was to be able to then move forward. And that's what was very crisp to me, and quite beautifully done in the movie, for example, where he had to experience the pain once removed, right? Now he was removed from being a child. His 40-year-old, almost 40-year-old self, reliving the past, was able to then allow him to be born again and start afresh in a new path. It's almost like in my mind's eye, he died and he had a second chance, a second incarnation, a second opportunity to deal with all the baggage that he brought with him.
And I think that this is very much what the benefactor Joanna de Angelis is all the time, talking to us, and this is why she goes so deep in terms of the psychoanalysis and thinking about ourselves and not being afraid to deal with that. Because if you think for a minute, of course, this what they show in the movie is not the only event that has made such a big trauma, and then they indicate the death of the mother, but we can only imagine what comes out next. And I mean, that was the huge aspect. On the other hand, we will think, how can a child deal with that? And of course, the father was trying to do the best that he could, and thinking that refraining and getting used to, what we call it, tough love, right? It's tough love. You have to get used to that. So, in a sense, for us nowadays, and even talking about what you were saying, Marcia, in terms of how hard it's been for us to grow up. I think that today, in the past 30 years, with all the technological advancements that we have, and this is also, something that is we read here in this book, Mirrors of the Soul, inspired by the works of Joanna de Angelis. There was so much advancements, so many movements in terms of liberations of everything. And now I think that we are entitled beings.
Mm.
And I don't care how old I am. I'm entitled to everything. And then we go to this kind of behavior, and you start, dealing in a very childish way with everything. And even when we comments there, I mean, starting from the frustrations of our growth, our childhood, the frustrations of the parents that now reflect in us. And I think, by the way, that his profession is absolutely perfect for the situation. Being an image consultant, I mean, he is the very much image of his profession. He lives in a persona, right? Mm-hmm. And so he knows that if he smiles a certain way, he's going to provoke an impact. If he talks to people a certain way, so he was always structured after that episode, right? To learn to do that. How am I going to be accepted? How are going to people, respect me? And I think that at the end of the day, all of us want that. We want people, even when we want people to see us in our Instagram page and say, oh my God, how wonderful, what beautiful, outfit, or, nice look, or wow, what a delicious dish you are eating now, whatever, I think, it's this need for approval that we have. And where is the whole? And of course, we cannot understand that all of this comes just from the experiences that we have in a lifetime. It has to come from before. So, and it makes so much more sense because while Anahy was talking about, the trauma and everything, the narcissistic right trauma that the boy was going through, I was thinking to myself, how can you fix that in just one incarnation?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And how can you fix parenthood? Right? Because no one is going to watch that movie and think and not be affected by it in both ways, if you are a parent, or in one way if you are, you remember your childhood in case you are not a parent. So and again is with dealing with responsibilities, cause and effect. Although we may excuse the father and understand why he made that comment, we cannot be oblivious to the pain that it caused and to the trauma that it caused to the child. And how can a parent fix that? And how can a child fix that in just one existence? I think that, like you said, the beauty of all of this is like when we are really ready to face those traumas and revisiting ourselves, paying more attention to what we are, not being afraid to walk the first steps to get better. This is a process, but it's not going to finish in just one incarnation. I wish.
And if we think about it, right, I'm moving away a little bit from the storyline and even the subject matter specifically, Jussara. But if we move in terms of what you mentioned earlier, we live in a society that it's quite comfortable, right? We have grown to have access to so much wealth, like the character, right? Wealth and technology and just so much opportunity that life in a material perspective, that form is given to us. But if we disconsider, and that I'm thinking of you and I to break down those concepts, but if you disconsider, if we repress all the content, and by content I mean the emotional content, the depth of each one of us, then it's all hollow. At the end of the day, and the 40-year-old, the midlife crisis is very symbolic in my way of perceiving, right? That's when most of us will have our famous midlife crisis. And that's when you visit or revisit not the 8-year-old cute little boy as an intruder in our house, but we revisit some anxieties, some angst, some things that you may not even know what it is, but gives you a sense of dissatisfaction. I've done everything possible. I am the best, whatever. And yet there's something missing. I think you mentioned, you alluded to it before, right, Jussara? That that
But
that
actually,
gap that is there. Yeah,
yeah, just to clarify, because um, we are not just talking here whether you have wealthy or not, whether you
sure.
have money or not, because today also with all this progress and exposure that we have, we may live in the shadows of others. We may
Mm,
live, oh, a movie star did that, and it's like I was there myself. So it has nothing to do about money and the possibilities, even because unfortunately we know that the majority of the population of the world struggle a lot financially speaking. So all
mhm.
of those concepts actually has to be knocking at the doors, whether you have a door or not, of everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Anahy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think connecting both of the aspects that you guys have brought, there is one sentence, one of the lines that the main character says is that I've forgotten my childhood. It is in the past where it belongs. He
Mm,
says that, okay, to the kid. That is saying, don't you remember that? This, don't you remember that? The kid is asking him. And he says that. And also, there's a funny part when he goes to see a psychiatrist. Of course, I pay attention to that. A lot of people are doing that. And he says he's hallucinating. He's,
yes.
because he's seeing this child that is himself and this and that. It's a very funny scene. But he says the psychiatrist, of course, is trying to make him calm down and sit. I won't sit because if I sit, I will stay 12 years talking about myself. It's very interesting. But what he says is, I'm asking you to make it go away with a medication
Yeah.
so I can go to work. I can go back to work. So don't we see nowadays, everybody going to ask doctors, medical personnel for some medication for pain, for conflicts, anxiety, and this and that to make it all go away. And it's interesting that what Shusana showed, Mirrors of the Soul, the book, that they are discussing this part about the inner child. One of the authors that writes this chapter says, how do we lose our authenticity? Okay, she's asking. And she's keep we always keep, in the psychiatric field and psychology, we keep looking for what is authentic inside of ourselves. It's very important to deal with our own truth, right?
Yeah.
Because not what somebody else is thinking about us, but what I'm not only thinking but feeling about myself. And only I am the person that can connect to this truth because it's inside of each one of us, not outside, not in the
Mhm.
social media for sure. So the authors are asking and saying that we lose the address of our inner home. We ignore who we are, from where we come, and what we feel. So all of these questions, what we are, from where we come, and what we feel, if we don't answer to these existential questions, we have existential emptiness. That was what you guys were talking about, and all this disconnection and what in hiding from our inner truth and sufferings and dramas. And of course we all have difficult memories, but exactly the difficult memories, our scars, are so important because they are what our truth, what the richness of what our soul, the story of our souls, right? So I think all of this is very important. And also, there's not an analyst, a Jungian analyst, James Hollis, that he says, if we don't examine our life and its story, we live an unconscious life. So it's what Jussara said. Okay, many things that happen to us are supposed to happen. We have chosen to have, to live this kind of conflict and difficulties, we could say, because it's very important for our soul, because there is a purpose, there is a learning, right, in the process of dealing with issues that certainly in the past, in our spiritual past, and in our psychological past, we haven't been able to deal with them. So I wanted to remember you of something also very important from the movie. When Jussara asked, was talking about living again, and how do we deal with things so fragile as the inner child, the memories of the past, our pains, and of course it cause and effect. So things that we have lived that are pains in our soul, not only to our personality in this life, but the movie answers in a certain way. I don't know if there was a psychologist or an analyst consulting, with the writer of the script, but probably yes, or maybe it was insight, intuitive of the writer, that remember who, there is an airplane that we don't know that it's an old airplane. We don't know the size in the beginning of the movie. Then we see that it's a kid's toy, right? And it's his airplane. And it's very funny and very cute, the story about the airplane. But who puts the airplane in outside of his house? That he goes out of his house because he sees a noise, and he thinks it's the father that has his father put the airplane, because the father is moving from house and has asked him help, and he said no, and but he thinks he's the father. Do you remember who puts the airplane outside of his house?
Himself, his older
Oh,
self, which is beautiful, beautiful image, right? How can, of course, I go into the metaverse, right? The future, the fourth dimension, where he in the future is claiming for the pain that he's going through as he's about to hit 40, which is now going back to the child at age 8. And I think it's just beautifully done. So thank you for bringing that image back to all of us. Jussara, what are your thoughts?
Oh, I think in terms of dealing with this purpose of our past, actually. I'm very happy. Actually, this is one thing that I would like to say, that we are doing this kind of podcast like and presentation, and having Dr. Anahy Fonseca with us in you, Marcia, because I think this process has helped me a lot in terms of also looking at myself, at my inner child, and not being afraid, like I said. And I think by having the possibility of understanding this under the light of Spiritism and Joanna de Angelis, and even having this Disney movie that can condensate the whole idea in a very palatable way for us to have to really be able to start dealing with that. And so and Anahy was talking about Dr. Hollis, and then there is one passage here that he says that actually impacted me so much. Let me translate this. The truth in relation to our inner our relationships is that we can never be better in our within our relationships than we are with ourselves. So many times this is one thing that it gets in the way
Yeah.
when we we all bring so much baggage, right? And I think the understanding and not expecting that much, and also realize how much it is our way of thinking and dealing with our own problems, it is going to direct our relationship with another person. And I remember, I mean, it's your case as well, Marcia. I don't know if it's Anahy, but I don't, maybe not. Uh, we have to move so many times, right?
Hmm.
From one country to another, to houses, different houses, and everyone would come and ask, how is it? And I said, you know what? I call home whatever I am. I bring my emotions. I bring, the atmosphere that we have, whether I'm living here or in another country or another country. So I think we have to think about it. And when the chapter goes on, they say, if we allow that to happen, we would be so much more capable of savoring the other.
That's
So
beautiful. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think this is a question that we have to ask ourselves, be it in a partnership, in a marriage, or a friend relationship. Are we really enjoying the other while just bringing our burdens and not giving way for us to really enjoy and savor the relationships?
Very good. Love it. Love it. It's all about being your authentic self and embrace yourself. If I may, I would like to bring my very personal opinion, which is the sense that we, from a religious perspective, right? And we're talking about Christianity in my case and Spiritism. We know that we're called upon this urgent ask to go toward our inner transformation, to go inside this journey to self discovery and transformation. But that is done through love. But love is such an abstract little word. What is love? What is to love? And I think Joanna de Angelis, specifically within the Spiritist authors, but the psychology as she brings to us this lens really makes it very palatable. And this movie, this discussion, these series of podcast like program really brings that perhaps that very tangible, very concrete way to understand that it's all about loving who we are, right? Embracing with empathetic love our all of our chubby what was it that he was embarrassed of himself, right? In the movie he was embarrassed as what he was, what he represented as a child with some problem of speech problems, etc. So he fixed the outside to be that perfected image, but not the inside, because he was not able to really accept and love. And that's the tip of the day for all of us. Let's learn to love. Let's learn to embrace who we are so that we can move forward. Anahy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think it's wonderfully said, you and Jussara. And I wrote here to remind myself to talk about compassion. So we are thinking the same, vibrating in the same wave. That actually, there were some lines. Remember that in the beginning of the movie, he gives advice to a lady that is sitting by his side in the airplane, but just for her to shut up because he's okay in his narcissistic self, and she wants some advice. But in the end, he goes to her and asks for advice. and tells about the kid and all this stuff. And she says to him that he has come to straighten him out. And that some sentence that I think it's great. And she says, we don't turn out to be who we thought we would be. That's what Jussara was saying, right?
Yes.
And everything that we should take care of our inner child. She doesn't say inner child, that he should take care of the child, and that everything would be great because we all do the best we can. So to have compassion towards ourselves, and to understand that we are doing the best we can, and we are always, as spiritist knowledge tells us, we are always going to have other chances, because we are all evolving to to the light, and to back to uh, the transcendent one, this unity as we have been taught. But I also wanted to say that this authenticity that we said, and it's beautiful said, that we all have a lot of characters, and it's a richness that we all have. So the opposite of the inner child is the wise old man or woman, right? It's also an archetype, the child and the wise old person. And so that the old man has put the airplane there. So we have all the experiences being old. And isn't that great that we can get old nowadays, right? Because people always say, no, I don't want to grow old and this and that. I want to stay young forever. It's beautiful that we can turn here in this personality, in this material world, uh, turn to be wise old men and women, and connect to our inner child. So we are everything at the same part. This is great at the same time. So this is great, and this is evolution, and we are all in this path. Thank you so much for
Thank
this
you.
wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you,
You
everyone.
I just say one thing. There is a subtleness and actually a kind of irony as well in this first dialogue that he has with this woman in the plane, because her main concern is about what she is, being, I think, a person from Texas that has a heavy accent and a certain vocabulary, and so he tells her, no, this is your trademark. So what's her trademark? Is what she is,
Yeah.
her authenticity. So so it shows that in a certain way, we are capable of picturing or depicting in other people what they are, what they represent. But sometimes we just go past that and do not look at exactly at, what they are, their roots, their originality, their uniqueness, and I think it's really interesting that he says, no, don't ever lose that. And if you smile, you're gonna be number one.
That's right.
Okay, if we look with smile, we are going to be number one. Let's be who we are, right?
I love it. I love it. And we are at time, but I really want to say thank you, Anahy, thank you, Jussara, for this wonderful conversation. I hope all of you are able to watch the movie or think about what is the inner child, what is your authentic self. With that, I'll see you next week. Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.